This week we're going to be talking about Zone 2 cardio. It has gained a lot of traction recently in the fitness world, which I'm happy to see. There are some misconceptions about what exactly it is, how to do it, how it impacts the lay person, the fitness enthusiast versus a performance athlete. And so I want to kind of dive into that and contextualize some of that. I also want to go over the physiological adaptations of Zone 2 cardio and kind of explain why we do it in the first place. If you enjoy this video, give us a like, give us a subscribe, and we'll keep them coming. Let's dive in. So we're gonna talk about what Zone 2 work actually is. And spoiler alert, it's called Zone 2 based on your heart rate zones. So we're going to get into the different methods of calculating your heart rate zones for this work. We're going to talk about the physiological adaptations, again, why we do it in the first place, and practical considerations. So Zone 2 may look different depending on if you are a casual marathoner, if you are a CrossFit athlete, or if you're just a general fitness enthusiast who's concerned about heart health. It's going to look a little bit different. So what is Zone 2 cardio? If you've ever done marathon or triathlon, you might hear it called base training. You're working on your aerobic base. What is aerobic? It means that we are using oxygen. So in order to fuel your muscles, oxygen is required. And in order for that to happen, it needs to be low intensity work. So LISS is another term for it. Low intensity steady state, something that you can sustain for a long time. We also hear it called long, slow cardio for people that may come from a strength background. That's typically what they might hear it called. Heart rate training is another term. Again, it's Zone 2 based on the fact that we are operating between 60 and 70% of your max heart rate. And pretty much it is 20 plus minutes of sustained work. So low intensity steady state, 20 plus minutes is what's going to get you steady state. Ideally, we want to be 30 plus, but when we get into the practical considerations for specific populations, you'll see where 20 minutes may make more sense to start. Okay, moving on. Apologize for the massive amount of numbers and words on the screen here. If you don't feel like reading this, we're going to go through it using myself as an example. There are numerous ways to estimate, and they say calculate, but these are really just estimations, your max heart rate, and using that, you can find your heart rate zone. So the traditional method is 220 minus your age gives you your max heart rate. And if we want to operate between 60 and 70% of that, we have to multiply it by 0.6 and 0.7 respectively. And that gives you your range. So for me, I'm 37 years old. 220 minus 37 is 183. That is my calculated max heart rate. Taking 60 to 70% of that gives me 109 to 128 beats per minute. So that would be my Zone 2 range. We can also use another method called the Maffetone method. It was named for a running coach. And this method gives you your max heart rate for aerobic function. And that is 180 minus your age. So for me, in this case, again, I'm 37, so 180 minus 37 gives me 143 beats per minute, which means that I would need to keep my heart rate below 143 beats per minute in order to maintain that Zone 2. There's another one I didn't include in here. There's just the standard guideline for Zone 2 aerobic work is they say between 130 and 150 beats per minute. We'll get into that in a minute. The resting heart rate method uses your max heart rate from the traditional method, but instead of just multiplying that by 0.6 and 0.7, we subtract your resting heart rate from your max heart rate, then multiply that by the requisite multiplier and add 60 to that number. So again, more math. For example, I am 37. 220 minus 37 still gives me 183. That's my max heart rate. Subtract my resting heart rate, which is 52 beats per minute, and I get 131. To calculate the high end of my range, 131 times 0.7 plus 60, that gives me 152 beats per minute. 131 times 0.6 plus 60 gives me 139. So that's going to give me a heart rate range of 139 to 152 beats per minute. So again, the kind of traditional range for zone 2 cardio is between 130 and 150 beats per minute. And if I look at these different calculations, the first one, based on the traditional method, has me actually, my entire range would be below 130 to 150 beats per minute. I'm 109 to 128. Under 143, it puts me kind of right in the middle. I can't exceed kind of halfway that traditional range. And then if I use the resting heart rate method, that more or less has me in line with the traditional 130 to 150. It's saying 139 to 152. So what the hell do I make of this? I've got so many different ranges. I've got 109 to 128. I've got 130 to 150. I've got under 143. And I've got 139 to 152. Why is there so much variability here? Really, it's not about heart rate. And we'll get into that for the, we'll get into what specifically is happening with the heart when we get into the physiological adaptations. But ultimately, this is aerobic exercise. It's about oxygen, which is pumped by the blood, or by the heart through the blood. But it is more about your lungs and your ability to breathe. So all of these calculations are just estimations. What we typically tell people at Viking Athletics is keep a conversational pace. And why is that? Heart rate is a proxy for how well you're breathing. If I can breathe normally and control my breathing, my heart rate isn't going to spike. If my heart rate spikes, it means that I am not able to keep up with the oxygen demands of my body, and I'm about to go anaerobic. I'm moving out of that aerobic zone. So heart rate and breathing rate are coupled nicely when it comes to aerobic work until you cross that anaerobic threshold. So all of these estimations, unless you're a performance, actually even if you are a performance athlete, we'll get into a better way to measure this. But like I said, these are all just proxies. If you want to know a better way to train for heart rate or for zone 2, run with somebody. Have a friend run next to you. Make sure you can actually have a conversation with them. Measure your heart rate and see how close you are to any of these. But if you can have a conversation while you are running or performing your exercise, you have a good idea that you are in zone 2. If you're going by yourself, nasal breathing. If I can maintain my breathing through my nose and I'm not huffing and puffing through my mouth, there's a good chance that I am in the right heart rate zone. So again, it's about oxygen, not necessarily about beats per minute, which is why we have our last calculation method, your VO2 max test. Your VO2 max is the max, it's when the heart rate you're at when you are using the maximum amount of oxygen available. And again, if we really want to dive into the physiology of this, I have 3 energy systems in my body: phosphate, glycolytic, and aerobic. Aerobic is the only one that uses oxygen. The other 2 are anaerobic. So what am I doing in the aerobic system? Fat is my body's fuel source as opposed to glucose from carbohydrates. So if we get a VO2 max test, there is something else measured there called your respiratory exchange ratio, which is how much oxygen I'm breathing in compared to how much carbon dioxide I'm breathing out. If we are at the exchange rate of 0.85, the ratio of 0.85, that is when I am using 50% fat and 50% glucose to fuel my muscles. That is going to give you the upper limit of your zone 2. So again, the only way to give you to test this would be in a lab. And if you are a performance athlete, it would make sense for you to get this done. More problems. VO2 max is modality specific. What does that mean? It means I'm going to have a different VO2 max for running versus rowing versus biking versus swimming. And swimming gets even more complicated because for every stroke, I'm going to have a different VO2 max. So you can see how for someone like a CrossFit athlete, this might get pretty far out of hand pretty quickly. when you need to be able to do all these different things. So if you don't have access to a lab and you don't want to go through that, nasal breathing is a great way, or the conversational pace, again, is a great way to kind of estimate this without worrying too much about heart rate. Swimming, of course, being the exception there. If you are able to maintain a conversation underwater, I want to know where you grew your gills, and I would love to have a pair myself so I can stay underwater for longer. Physical adaptations from Zone 2. I'm jumping to number 2 here, improved fat metabolism. You know, we mentioned in the aerobic system you're using fat rather than glucose to fuel your muscles. And which muscles in particular are we going for? Type 1 muscle fibers. These are slow twitch muscle fibers. They are fed through the oxidative system. And again, since Zone 2 is really about oxygen, we have to tie that into muscle fiber type. As soon as I am not recovering enough to keep my type 1 muscle fibers firing, I end up recruiting type 2, the explosive muscles. And if I do that in the middle of an aerobic effort, that's going to cause my heart rate to spike because they are fueled with glucose. Anaerobic. I've now decoupled my heart rate from my breathing. My heart rate's going to spike. My breathing's going to pick up to try to catch up with it. And I'm going to get out of breath. So that's what happens when we cross that anaerobic threshold. Is I'm now switching from type 1 to type 2 muscle fibers because my type 1 fibers are burnt out and not recovered. And I'm trying to buy them time by using type 2 muscle fibers. So this is where when we get into the difference between like power versus endurance, the physiological adaptations are completely different. When I'm doing a power exercise like an Olympic lift and I'm trying to recruit as much muscle as humanly possible, I want all my muscle fibers firing together to generate the highest possible force in the shortest amount of time. Extremely anaerobic phosphate system. It's a pulse. Boom. Done. The opposite end of the spectrum, when it comes to type 1 muscle fibers and we're doing long, slow endurance work, we're trying to fire as little muscle as possible at one time. And as soon as the muscles I'm firing, one packet of fibers is exhausted, I move on to the next packet of muscles and I use those. And hopefully I have enough to keep cycling through the type 1 over and over and over again. And that's how I build my endurance, and that is an expression of my endurance. Again, if I don't have enough type 1 muscle fiber developed and it's not developed to the point where it can recover, I end up using the type 2, and now I've gone anaerobic. So that is the physiology of Zone 2. It's all about developing your aerobic pathway, improving your fat metabolism, and the type 1 muscle fiber endurance. For the layperson who is doing Zone 2 work for heart health, there are 4 chambers to the heart. You've got the 2 atriums left and right, and the 2 ventricles left and right. The left ventricle is what pumps blood to the body. It takes oxygenated blood from the heart. So let's go through that cycle quickly. Should have put a graphic in here, but oh well. Your right ventricle pumps blood into the lungs. It is unoxygenated. It gets oxygenated in the lungs. It arrives in the left atrium, goes down into the left ventricle. Left ventricle pumps that blood to the body. Body uses the oxygen, returns the deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. So, ventricular hypertrophy increases the amount of blood you are able to store in the left ventricle, which means that every beat of my heart allows me to pump more blood. I hold more, I can pump more. So again, I get more oxygen. I get more oxygen to the type 1 fibers. So for people concerned with heart health, that's a big deal. Practical considerations. For the layperson concerned about heart health, whom we just mentioned, in order to get that ventricular hypertrophy, you need 30 plus minutes of steady state cardio. And your heart doesn't care which modality you use. If running beats you up, great, grab a rower, grab a bike, go swimming, do something low impact that you can sustain for 30 plus minutes, and you will get those benefits. In order to I can't talk right now. In order to improve performance, toy boat. There we go, back on track. We want to look at specific modalities and improve our zone 2 cardio in those specific modalities. So I'm going to use running as an example because it seems to be incredibly popular, and it's what most people associate zone 2 with. We want a minimum of 20 minutes of work, and I say accumulated work here because if I'm concerned with performance, then I need to keep my heart rate and my speed the same. Because what typically happens is I get focused on my heart rate. Let's say I'm using 143 beats per minute. I'm going to use that method. I got to stay under 143 beats per minute. And I've been running for 12 minutes, and I feel my heart rate start to spike, and I'm now going above 143 beats per minute. What am I going to do? Most people just slow down, and they go at a slower pace, and they allow the heart rate to come back down. Which, again, if I'm a layperson and I want to go for 30 minutes and I'm only caring about my heart, that's fine. But if I'm a performance athlete trying to improve my ability to do low intensity and use that as a rest and as part of a bigger workout, let's say I'm a CrossFit athlete and there's running in a workout and I want the run to actually serve as rest for me, all I'm training myself to do by slowing down when my heart rate spikes is I'm training myself to slow down. So what happens if I just keep my speed the same and I don't slow down? My heart rate spikes and I am no longer in an aerobic zone. I'm going anaerobic. So this is why we say accumulated work. What I want to do is when my heart rate starts to spike and it goes above that limit, I stop and I walk. My clock stops. I'm no longer doing zone 2. I'm going to walk until my heart rate is back down. When my heart rate is back down, I'm going to run at the same speed that I was running previously until my heart rate spikes again. And then I stop and walk, rinse and repeat until I've accumulated 20 minutes. If you repeat this, you will get to the point where you can run 20 minutes continuously at that same speed without your heart rate spiking. What do I do then? Increase the duration. I go to 25 minutes. Maybe I need to stop at 21 minutes and walk a little bit, and then I get my last 4. That may happen. But I increase the duration, and I accumulate 25 minutes. Once I'm at 25 minutes unbroken, I go to 30, then 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and then an hour. When I can do an hour at that pace without spiking my heart rate, I'm going to go back down to 20 minutes, and I'm going to use a faster pace. And I will repeat this sequence over and over and over again until my zone 2 pace has increased. And my favorite example of this, and you can actually look at the evolution of the CrossFit Games over time. Rich Froning was the first men's 4-time champion. He was dominant in the early 2010s. He won 2011, 12, 13, and 14. His zone 2 pace for running was a 7:55 mile. He could maintain 7 minutes and 55 seconds for an hour without spiking his heart rate. When he moved on to team competition, Matt Fraser took the reins and became a 5-time men's champion. His zone 2 pace, 7:35. Jeffrey Adler just won the games last year. Jeffrey Adler is a sub 7-minute mile pace for zone 2, which means he can run faster than 7-minute mile pace for an hour without blowing up his heart rate. And if you look at marathoners, they're all type 1 muscle fibers, aerobic, and they are maintaining 5-minute miles and doing this. So it is possible to improve your pace while having it serve as purely aerobic. Your heart rate's not going to spike, and you can sustain this indefinitely. Same thing goes for rowing. You can do 20 minutes of accumulated work at a given heart rate and a given stroke rate and a given power output. Once you do 20 minutes continuously at that, you increase the duration, and then we increase the speed. It is not exciting. It is quite boring, but it is precise and it works. So that's why we say for the layperson, you're probably not going to do that. If you become a marathoner and you have specific goals to actually, like say you're trying to get a sub 3 minute, sub 3 hour marathon time, this is how you gradually improve your pace over time. So why do we care? Again, for the layperson, you don't. You just want 30 minutes at that particular heart rate. Adjust your speed as necessary, and you'll get the benefits to your heart. For performance athletes, we're going to get a little bit more specific, understand what it is you're trying to do, and then you can tailor the training to that. We don't just want to go for a specific duration and practice slowing down. We want to be precise about how we do this. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope I didn't confuse anybody, and I hope I cleared this up. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We're happy to reply. Again, give us a like, give us a subscribe. If you have topics you want to hear about, post that in the comments too, and we'll keep this going. See you next time.